kia ora koutou katoa. So my name is Alicia and I'm a youth librarian at Turanga, which is Christchurch's new central library. And what we're doing today, my co-host is Alexia, who's a lead librarian at Hutt City Libraries. So today our interview is just sort of talking about your books that you've been nominated for the Russell Clark Award for illustration, and we want to talk to you guys about what it's like being a professional illustrator in New Zealand and the process of being an illustrator. So today with this Book Alive event we have Gavin Bishop. He's a highly acclaimed author and illustrator of over 60 books for children. He's been nominated for and won a variety of awards for all his work, and he even has an award named after him, the LIANZA Gavin Bishop Award for Picture Book Illustration. He's illustrated everything from Maori myths to non-fiction, and this year his book Wildlife of Aotearoa has been nominated for the Russell Clark Award for illustration, and he's already scooped up prizes from Storylines and New Zealand Book Lovers. We're also super excited and thrilled to have with us Kimberly Andrews, who's an author and illustrator as well, and her fantastic book Puffin the Architect won the Russell Clark Award for illustration last year, as well as prizes from Storylines and New Zealand Book Lovers. She's also illustrated Maori myths and non-fiction, and this year she's been nominated for the Russell Clark Award for her gorgeous illustrations in Song of the River, which is written by New Zealand icon Joy Cowley.
Hi.
Over to you, Alexia.
So I'm just going to share our screen. So we've got Kimberly's illustrations in Song of the River, and we have Gavin's illustrations in Wildlife of Aotearoa. And then we're going to go on to a little bit of a introductory kind of round. So we've all drawn self-portraits of each other, of ourselves. And when that comes up on screen, if you wouldn't mind just kind of explaining your reasoning for why you draw the portrait the way you did, and give yourself a little bit of an introduction about who you are, who your favourite book is, all that kind of stuff. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
That's me. So this is a self-portrait of me, Kimberly Andrews, with my friends Puffin and her two pufflings, who were the main characters of my book, Puffin the Architect. And I drew this because they're always in my head. The characters seem to fill my head and my ideas, so that seemed like a good thing to have them as part of my self-portrait. I did it all on the iPad, so I use Procreate on the iPad as well as Photoshop with a watercolor pen and pencil combination. And did you want me to do an intro of myself as well now as well?
Yep, if you'd like.
So I'm originally from Canada, Banff, Alberta in the Rocky Mountains, hence a bit of a mixed Kiwi accent, Canadian Kiwi accent. And I've been here since I was about 8 or 9. And yeah, I've studied science and biology and geology and got into art and illustration. And here I am illustrating children's picture books.
Awesome. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Okay, Gavin, you're up.
Good.
Well, I didn't have much time to draw this, so I just drew this very, very quickly. And it's sort of essentially just a rough line drawing. Perhaps my nose is a bit fat, but otherwise I think it's quite accurate. I have been writing and illustrating books for children since 1978, before you were all born.
Yeah.
I had my first book published in 1981, and it was called Mrs. Mcginty and the Bizarre Plant. And although it wasn't the first book that I wrote Biddy Biddy before that, book about a sheep. And I had trouble getting it published because in those days, New Zealand picture books needed to be co-produced internationally to boost up the print run.
Oh, wow.
And so they tried desperately to sell my book about a sheep, Biddy Biddy, to other countries such as France, Scotland, England, even Australia, and nobody would take it because they said a book about a sheep having an adventure is ridiculous. They think that's just stupid. Nobody could relate to a sheep having an adventure like that. So in the end, I said, well, would it help if I took lower royalties for that book? And they said, yeah, that would make it work. That would make it possible for us to publish it. And so I said, okay, what if I took, 5% instead of 10% royalties? And they said, yes, we'll do that. And we'll go ahead and publish it. And they did. And it was quite a hit. In fact, I don't think it's been out of print since 1982.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing. Yeah, I had a copy.
When it was published. I think it's still around in some form. It's been published in Te Reo Māori. It's been, there have been various versions, small format, large format. It's been completely redesigned. It's been fiddled around with, and as I said, it has been in print for a very, very long time. I tend to like to write my own material when possible. But from time to time, I have illustrated other people's books. I've worked quite a lot with Joy Cowley. I've done a couple of books with Margaret Mahi. But on the whole, if I can, I like to be in charge of the whole project, so that I can manipulate the text. I can eliminate it as I illustrate it and fiddle around with it. And so the whole thing is more fluid, I think.
Mm.
Awesome.
Is there anything else you want me to say? I mean, I don't want to... Yeah, that's enough at the moment.
Good. I think you've touched on some of the questions that you're going to be asking later as well, which is nice. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the next introduction is Alicia.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, so I drew myself as a cat because I
Very good,
have
Alicia.
4 faces.
That's terrific.
So I drew some of the most iconic parts, like me being a youth librarian, and some of my own personal interests. So I like birds, I like houseplants, I like playing Dungeons and Dragons. And at the library, I read and promote lots of comics and graphic novels. So I was a big fan of illustration and the way they can tell stories. I hoard way too many library books and never read them all in time before I have to turn them back.
Join the club.
Yeah. There's a big stack of them. I have way too many pens, which I then lose at the library, but luckily for me, customers also leave their pens behind, so I've regrouped some. And I'm a big fan of zines and zine making and zine workshops, so I tend to run lots of zine workshops here at the library at Tauranga.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good on you.
Thank you.
What sort of houseplants do you grow?
I have a mixture. I have a lot of chain of hearts, I have ferns, I have some calatheas, which are in dubious states of life, and some Tahitian bride, hanging plants. So I have a few just to decorate my inner city apartment, make it feel more natural, because I do like being around nature.
Great.
Awesome. Okay, so this is me.
Wow.
So this is, I had to redraw it because I saw everybody else's illustrations and I was like, oh, they're so good. So I did this today.
Wow, you did that today. That's very cool.
Wow.
So this is me, and I'm wearing a historical dress because I am a historical costumer as well as being a librarian.
Oh, yeah.
I have my dog in there because she's
a beagle?
Life. Yeah, a beagle.
Yay, I love beagles. I had a beagle.
Oh, fantastic. So she actually traveled with me from Australia.
Oh.
Which is really wonderful that I got to keep her with me.
Yeah.
And I've got the Chinese writing for luck behind me because I'm actually half Chinese.
Cool.
So,
Good, loving you. Terrific.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done.
Love it, Alexia.
Thank you. So I'm really, really excited about talking about your books today because I've been kind of hoarding them a little bit over the last couple of weeks. They are so beautifully illustrated and I've been showing them off to all my friends. So I'm really excited about the next couple of slides, especially looking at the scans of your books and especially talking about what went behind them and why you had the kind of design choices that you did. So I think Kimberly is up first. Alicia, you're ready?
Oh, yeah. So would you like me to talk about this spread?
Yeah. So I think these are your kind of your favorite, or 2 pages that both of you kind of nominated to talk about. Just give us a bit of an idea about.
Lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, I chose this spread out of the book Song of the River because I think it was the first one I actually did. and it is extremely reminiscent of my childhood in Canada. So where I'm from in North America, there's a lot of forests of lodgepole pine, so these really beautifully straight pine trees. And I just have, I don't even know if this is a specific visual memory, but I have memories of these really straight vertical visual elements, and I wanted to capture that and get the depth. And that's what I tried to do here with Cam the mountain boy. So he's exploring the little stream that turns into a creek that flows into a river. I had a lot of fun with this, hiding little animals in trunks, and my little daughter thinks that one of the deers is a cat. So she keeps saying cat whenever I read it.
I've just noticed a wolf in the background as well. I didn't see that before.
Yes, the owl and the squirrel. It let me play with light and shading, which is by far my favorite part of any illustrations when they come alive. And I'll talk more about that during the process part of the talk. But yeah, I thought that this captured my memory of my childhood.
That's awesome. And we'll have a look at the next one from yours.
Yeah, and so this is further down Cam's adventure in the river. And I really like this spread because it showed, one of my main things with a picture book is I want to try and change the camera angle. So not a literal camera angle, but the angle that I'm drawing from in the perspective. So this is drawing straight up, looking at Cam up under the water. And I love how this changed the flow of the book. Up until that point, we saw sort of standard either top shot, like down angles, or straight across. And then this is just like quite a breath of fresh air or fresh water. So you were dunked into the river. And I really love how it came together with the rippling water texture. And it allowed the gold and green frogs of Joy's beautiful words to really shine.
And you have a third spread.
I do, sorry. I got a bit choosy. This I also really loved because it set the scene. And at this point of the story, Cam is feeling completely overwhelmed. He's right down there in the bottom left-hand corner, if you can see him. And so this was, again, another tool to play with to show how overwhelmed this little boy felt and how big the second character in the book, the river, had become. And I think it just gives that insignificance that we all sometimes feel when we're in either nature or in a man-made, human-made environment. And it was really fun to do. And I even hid my beagle. You can see my beagle down in the bottom right-hand corner with a woman walking it.
I can.
There you go. Another beagle lover.
I really enjoyed the way you have all these different parts of nature as you move with the river on its journey, and it's really amazing seeing the forest, the rock pools, the pools, and then the ocean, and it's port. It's just really cool, a different journey.
Yeah, it was a really great, it's an amazing structure of a book, and it was really clever how Joy did it. And it was also, a really fun exploration of a natural journey. So that was fun.
And we'll go on to a couple of spreads from Gavin's book.
Beautiful.
Okay. Well, this book was as much about research and finding information as it was actually producing illustrations. The illustrations, I had to check everything that I drew to make sure that they were accurate.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people out there know a lot about birds and insects and reptiles and things like that. So I had to take enormous care over getting things right, physically right. The book sort of tells a story about those 5 eels on the bottom left-hand page, and they hold the whole book together. And we follow their journey through the whole book And then back when they become adults, the few that manage to escape being killed or eaten, they go on back to the tropical Pacific, where they mate and then die. And I didn't know very much about that. And when I read about long-finned eels and the fact that they're endemic to New Zealand, they can't be found anywhere else, and if we don't take care of them and look after them and lose them, we can't go anywhere else in the world to find some more to replace them. So I thought there was such an important icon of this whole business of looking after our wildlife, that I thought I'd make them a feature of the book. So they swim through the whole book, and they get bigger, and they sort of have little adventures, like a kind of subplot. So the book looks at wildlife of New Zealand, not only endemic wildlife, stuff that was here when early Maori settlers arrived, but also introduced wildlife. I mean, the Maori introduced wildlife. They introduced dogs and rats, and they think they may have brought chickens with them from the Pacific Islands as well, but they don't seem to have survived. And then, of course, the Europeans arrived, and they brought a swag of new animals and birds. And they even had acclimatization societies to acclimatize these creatures that didn't actually naturally, settle here, like blackbirds and thrushes and sparrows and things like that. Unfortunately, the introduction of creatures from elsewhere have had a huge detrimental effect on our own wildlife. And so there's a page later in the book too. I don't know whether you've chosen that one, but there is a page later in the book looking at those creatures that were introduced by European settlers to make them feel more at home, really, I suppose. But they've had a huge impact on New Zealand.
I can actually just grab the book to show you that as well.
Thank you.
Gavin, Kimberly mentioned that she uses digital medium to do her books. What kind of art supplies or materials do you use to illustrate your books?
I'm totally old-fashioned. I just draw everything.
Beautiful.
With pens and brushes, and that's all.
So do you use watercolour or ink?
Yeah, I use watercolour and I use coloured ink. Some of the ink that the ink that I started with like 40 years ago was not very good, and it used to fade. If you left a picture out in the light, it would fade quite quickly, and some of it wasn't waterproof. So if you painted over something, you lost the first coat.
Which way do you do it? Do you do the ink first and then watercolor now, since they're watertight?
The new inks are absolutely brilliant, and a lot of them are liquid acrylics. And they are waterproof, and they're light fast, and they're very strongly coloured, and so I tend to water everything down. And what I tend to do is I paint the whole picture in just very lightly with light washes, and then go back and reinforce that colour if I think it should be reinforced somewhere. So, for example, this moa here on the right-hand side, I would have painted that just very lightly with a wash first, and then I went back, and while the wash was still wet, I painted into it with stronger colour. And I just built up like that until I felt it was okay. And say for the dog, then I painted that a very, very pale ochre, and then I used a little bit of a darker browny ochre over the top to create shadows and sort of a three-dimensional quality. So I build these things. They take a long time to do. I would, not this particular picture, but some of the more complex pictures would take me probably a week to do.
Do you spend much time drying? Like, do you use a hairdryer to dry it quickly, or do you want it to?
No. I usually have 2 or 3 of these pictures on the go.
Oh, yes.
At the same time. So while one's drying, I get onto the other one, and sometimes I mix up batches of colour, like the blue on the legs of Papatuanuku here. I mixed up that blue in a little yolk pot and kept it so that wherever I painted Papatuanuku, Ranginui, sorry, in the sky, it used the same colour out of a little bottle.
So I know with this book is very, very large. How big are the illustrations when you actually...
Same size.
Same size as the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actual size of the book.
I've just found the spread on the...
Yeah. That's one. That's a good example. Wow. Yeah. That's the spread showing all the introduced species and the effects they've had on the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Beautiful.
Kimberly, how long does it take you to do your illustrations?
It's a hard one to pin down, but I work consecutively through illustrations, so I never do one and just finish it. So probably same with a lot of other illustrators, but all up, it probably takes me 4 months to do a full picture book. So I would say, I don't know, I could probably do a full illustration in a day or two if I really sat down and my daughter was with someone else.
So how long did it take you to do Song of the River?
That took me, I was actually looking at the emails yesterday. I got the initial offer in June of 2018 and I finished it in November. So it was about 4.5 months.
That's pretty good going.
And it was actually, luckily, my daughter was 5 days overdue. And I finished it on the 4th day. So,
oh, wow.
Great time.
Two due dates pretty close together.
And how long did it take you, Gavin, for your one?
Well over a year.
It's beautiful.
64 pages. It's quite it's 2 picture books.
It's not a standard book.
It's the length of 2 picture books. Yeah, the illustrations, I can't remember, but they would have taken me probably 8 or 9 months, I suppose.
When did you decide to do it as a 64-page format? Or was
Nothing to do with me. It wasn't my decision. Wasn't my decision. The publishers came up with the idea of this book as a follow-up to Aotearoa, the book, The Story of New Zealand. I hadn't thought of doing a book like this at all. In fact, I had other proposals with them that I wanted to do. And they came back to me and said, look, would you consider doing a big book about the history of New Zealand for the last, say, 65 million years? I said, oh, that sounds fantastic. I would love to do that. Then 2 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, my God, I can't do a book about 65 million years of New Zealand history in 64 pages.
Yeah.
And anyway, I freaked out, and then I started thinking about it. And the wildlife of Aotearoa was a similar sort of, they had a similar approach. They said to me, how about doing a book about New Zealand wildlife, 64 pages, about all the different kinds of animals and birds that we have in New Zealand, not only native ones, but introduced ones as well. So both of these books were suggested to me.
Yeah.
I would never have thought of them. And also the other thing I'm very grateful for is the input of the designers, because you can see here there's a huge amount of text, and much of it's quite small, but squeezing it into some of the places, I sometimes, because I'm not a designer, I laid the page out, then I would do the illustrations, and then I would sometimes not leave enough space for the text that was going to go in, you see. Luckily, these people worked digitally, and they were able to sort of nudge some of my objects across the page a little bit and poke the text in, or even eliminate some of my, say, for example, the wriggly line suggesting the sea, the ocean, Moana Nui Kiwa here in the background on the left-hand side page. They were able to eliminate some of those if they needed some more room.
Yep.
We would be
so
wondering.
I'm very grateful to the designers that I worked with.
And how did it work for you, Kimberly, when you were trying to incorporate the text that Joy Cowley provided?
Same gratefulness to the designers. They are amazing people. But yeah, I have to keep text placement in mind, and it's something that I have to keep hammering home to myself, as well as the gutter, so the middle line page. Yeah, so for example there, I always forget, I'm drawing it as one page, but you forget that in the binding process, you lose quite a chunk of that illustration in that gutter, in that middle bit. So I'm always getting into trouble missing that gutter. But with the text placement, I think it's really great if you can plan it right from the very beginning, because then you don't get wedded to ideas that you've already drawn and you don't want to move them. With the designer, they don't want it to look obvious where the text is going to go. So you don't want to just put sometimes I put a big white fluffy cloud in because that's all I can do. But usually it's better if you can build it in, like Gavin's done here. Like building it into the illustration is much more cohesive and a nice look. Yeah.
I quite like the way the text sits there, like in the sky.
Yeah.
It's far too dark down there.
That's right. Yeah. But there would have been a way to put it underwater had I wanted to do that from the get-go, but not once I put the fish in. I don't want to lose those fish. So you do have to think about that a lot.
Yeah.
So we'll go on to the second page from Gavin's book. I did choose this one because one thing which I really, really love about this book, even though it's about the wildlife of Aotearoa, it's also got a lot of the gods in it and a lot of some really beautiful imagery from Māori kind of art. Yeah. So I chose this one here.
Oh, yeah.
And is that also the cover, Gavin?
No, that's the cover of the... That's very similar to the cover of...
Oh, yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Same people. Husband and wife. It's Ranginui Papatūānuku. I just like the idea of the story of Tāne Mahuta, who was one of the 70 sons. These two produced 70 sons. They were all gods, all immortal, and 7 of them were given really important jobs to do. And Tāne Mahuta was the god who was put in charge of all the forests. And when he was also instrumental in separating his mother and father, because they were lying on top of one another the whole time, and all 70 gods couldn't do anything. They couldn't walk around, they couldn't do anything because there was no room. And so Tāne Mahuta separated them and pushed Ranginui up into the heavens to become the sky, and Papatūānuku became the earth. Well, of course, when they were separated, the light poured in, the light that was hiding, had been hidden by them, the light poured in and poured over both of these huge, huge entities. And all their children could see how naked they were. And so what they did first, they clothed Ranginui with stars and with the sun and with the moon. And then they looked and they saw their mother, Papatūānuku, lying there completely naked. And so what Tāne Mahuta did was he spread the forests all over his mother's body, and then he inhabited them with birds, reptiles, and insects. And so that's what I'm doing here. So this is the beginning of the looking at New Zealand forests and birds and things in New Zealand forests, and linking it back to the incident where Tāne Mahuta, covered his mother with forests to spare her nakedness, to cover her nakedness. So But I was very, very grateful to the designers again and how they used a variety of typefaces. So there's the one kind of typeface up here, which is the title. And then there's another typeface over here, which picks up another part of the story. And then right down on the bottom left-hand corner, they have actually, the designers actually curved the text to follow the flow of the eels, which I think is really lovely. I would never have thought of doing that. I just think those little kind of things to discover while you're looking at this page are really a delight.
And it kind of gives a really good harmony between the text and the illustration as well. Like it doesn't look like
doesn't
it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, yeah.
I think we've got, the next one is actually a bit of a process from Kimberly's book, Song of the River. So I think it's one illustration kind of shown through a variety, like, or maybe from the script onwards.
Yeah. Yeah, we thought it'd be really good to hear from you guys about the process illustrating book. You enjoyed talk a little bit about, for instance, like Gavin, your publishers were the ones who approached you with the ideas for different titles of Aotearoa. And Kimberly, in your case, you were given a text from Joy Cowley. I want to know, like, what's it like from the moment you get approached by a publisher or client, or the moment you come up with the idea for your own book, and then how you take that idea and then transform it into a pitch book to be published.
Yeah, it's a really interesting process, and one probably I'm only just getting used to with other people's work. So usually, in this case, it was Gecko. I got approached by them, and they sent me this manuscript. And so this is it printed out on day one of seeing it. And it's terrifying reading Joy Cowley's words and thinking, oh, I have to illustrate these. I remember just thinking, how am I going to do this? This is amazing. But then you sit with it for a few days and you read it over and over again. And I don't know if you can see on this manuscript, but the pages, as they saw them broken down, are separated by little asterisks. But I don't know if I read it like that. And so I just started writing page numbers next to the spaces where I thought it would naturally break.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I'd changed it. Because if people don't know the background of Song of the River, it was previously published in 1997 and illustrated by Elizabeth Fuller, another amazing New Zealand artist. But I really didn't want to Google that book. I didn't want to know anything about it. Don't want to look at it. Yeah. And so from the get-go, I actually changed it. And that's what you see here on this image. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a different part of the process, but this is my slightly pedantic grid that I draw for every book I've ever done. And it basically plans out how I work through the illustrations. So you can see on the left-hand side, I've got a column of all the different page numbers. And then all the way along the top is every element in each page, in each spread that needs to be done. So I work my way through from left to right usually. So I start with all the pencil characters, which is the first column, and go through and do them all. So that's what I'm currently doing with a picture book of my own at the moment, is pencil drawings. And I'm either using a real pencil or on paper and scanning it in, or I'm using a pencil in the iPad and working that way. And so then I just go through making sure that I've done all the backgrounds at once, all the sky at once. It's sort of like how Gavin was saying, you mix up that blue to keep it consistent throughout the book. I find that doing the sky and the textures of the clouds all at once help me maintain a consistency. So this is what this image is showing, is me going through an entire process of the final illustrations.
Wow.
I love how organized it is.
I'm not organized in life, but in that I am organized. So this is so after I got the email from Gecko and I looked through the manuscript, this is the very first thing I did. I think it was even on the back side of that manuscript. I flipped it over and I drew out this grid of 32 pages. I don't see number 31 and 32, but I just basically mapped out how I saw the book. And I want to do this as quickly as I possibly can, because you don't want to get hung up by your need for perfection or your need for drawing it so that other people can understand it. I know no one else gets this, and probably don't. You know, you can't really pick out that there's an entire city there, there's a river there. But it just allows me to quickly see where my camera is going to be, where I'm going to change the pace of the book. This moment is probably the most key moment of a book production for me. This is all the energy, all of the mental effort goes into here. So this is the most important page, I would say. We can go to the next one.
I noticed at the top of your manuscript you wrote inspired by Ponyo.
Oh yeah. I initially had ideas of Cam, because if you read the manuscript without any illustrations, it's actually quite magical. Like he runs down the mountainside and laughs over a creek, and it's all very it made me initially think of Ponyo, because Ponyo runs on the water and is fun with this water, you know, a water baby, really. And so I wanted Cam initially to be running with the trout, but the salmon and the trout would actually be just shapes of water.
Yeah.
But that was a little bit too far-fetched. So we went back to normal river, which I think was the right call. So yeah, once I've got that all sort of sorted in my head, and I can start to visualize it, that now it's just hard work. So it's no longer as much creative energy. It's just getting down and working on each page, still keeping it really rough, and really importantly, keeping it black and white. Because as soon as you introduce color, and I'm sure, Gavin, you know, like that feeling, it just complicates everything so much. And with black and white, you can see the tones and see if things are working. So you can see there in number 12 and 13, my Ponyo ode to running on the water. So each thumbnail is basically still the same size, still one A4 page. At this point, I'm working on my iPad, and I'm zooming in and doing quick doodles, working out where the light will be, and writing some notes on each page. So this actually usually goes to the publisher and the book designer before I go much further, because that's when they get the chance to say what's right and what's wrong and where I've gone a little bit array. And then this image shows my piles and piles of to-do lists and changes. So this is how I get changes back from the book designer. So she will send me a worked up PDF, and then I print it out with all of the comments summarized. And then it just allows me to go through page by page and make sure I've ticked off all of the changes that they want. And mostly it is aligning the text placement, or things behind the text are distracting. So for the one down on the left, which was that spread I showed you with the trees, the text it's almost fighting with the snow there. So we ended up having to pull the shadows back a bit on the snow. But yeah, this is the process, the nitty gritty. I can put an audiobook on at this point and just work away. I don't have to think too much. And then this is an example of a rough worked up. So once I finished that storyboard process, so the small thumbnails, I'll take one of those thumbnails and blow it up in Photoshop to the actual size. So like Gavin, I work at actual size. I just set that on the Photoshop, and I work at 300 DPI so that my resolution is nice and crisp. And then this is where I work out where things should go. So you can see that I've just worked out largely on this spread, buildings, placements of boats, and shadows. I haven't put any characters in apart from Cam, who's over on the right this time, but he got moved. So this is a place to really start refining the illustration. And then character concepts are always fun. So this is usually almost at the same time as the storyboard, possibly a little bit after the storyboard. And I'm getting to know the characters. So I spent a bit of time reading the manuscript. And it's almost, that's why it's so important to not Google anything about, about books when you're in the midst of one, is because I personally get an immediate vibe of a character straight away. So I knew that grandfather had to be quite round, rotund, with little skinny legs. And then Cam, I wanted to be unisex, like gender neutral. I wanted him to be approachable by girls and boys. And I didn't want him to be necessarily aged. So I sort of wanted a toddler, but a toddler that could walk well. We ended up making him look older because we got worried about him going on such a long adventure by himself.
Yep.
But yeah, that's the character concept stage.
Do you go through some process, Gavin, when you're doing the character design? Because I know because you did the illustrations for, I've forgotten the name of it now, like where the house that Jack built.
Mm.
And the characters in there were so wonderfully kind of realized. Do you go through a similar kind of process of kind of developing your characters?
Sometimes. It depends really on the book. The one book that I can remember thinking a lot about the main character was Mr. Whistler, that Margaret Mahy wrote. And I did lots and lots of drawings of this man who I knew was going to appear on just about every page. The biggest challenge is to keep them looking consistently the same, your characters. And in fact, I've even heard of people who make little plasticine models.
Yeah, I've heard of that too.
Yeah, where they, can draw them from that little model, which is quite a nice idea.
Bad idea, yeah.
But I don't usually have very much time. And so once I sort of establish a character, in the old days, I used to spend a lot of time making dummies. I'd draw a storyboard and then I would do a full-size dummy. Well, I sort of did that with these two big books. But even at dummy stage, they were still very, very rough. With these two books, because of the limited amount of time and because of the enormous amount of time it was taking me to do these pictures, I put a lot of energy into the final artwork. And that's where I did all my final research for animals and birds and insects and things like that. I roughly drew them when I did the layouts of these books, but then I spent a lot more time actually looking up each one of these creatures, either in books that I got out of the library or going to sites online and finding photographs and finding references to these creatures that I was drawing. And so it was a different problem, Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
I think we'll just jump back into Kimberly's one because we're actually going to see this illustration on the bottom left being developed.
Yep.
Great.
Yeah, so this is the very first step of that grid that I showed you. So this is the pencil drawing, and I used a Palomino pencil for this one, which I love, nice and soft pencil. And then I block out the background. Yep. So then this is actually scanned leather. So the back side of leather that I scanned in and placed down the brown, and then I blended the background. So the next one. So this is just me blocking in shapes and trees and being really rough and not being too perfect. And again, more trees. So I'm working from the background, midground to foreground because you always want your biggest contrast at the front. Well, in this case, I did. I wanted the action to be right up at the front. So you're pulling shades up to the top. And then adding on the foreground detail and then blocking out Cam and the main characters. So the river and the animals. And then that's watercolor wash, digital watercolor wash over Cam. And it's really great in Photoshop because you can, once you've blocked Cam out, you can just go and select his entire shape every time. And so I can just watercolor without thinking about the edges too much, which is an absolute luxury. In my early days, I did do a bit of watercolor. And yeah, this is a different beast for sure.
Yeah.
And then the next bit is the shading. So this is where I love getting to this point of any book, and I long for it. And I'm really longing for it in my book currently because it's all very flat until this point.
Yeah.
It feels very 2D and just lacking. And then when you put these shades in, so what I do here is it's painting, but I set my layer on Photoshop, if anyone listening is Photoshop artist, to multiply. And so that creates this, it's a see-through layer, but it darkens everything below it. And that just allows me to, I can always change it later because it's a separate layer. I haven't affected anything below. And it's a really powerful tool, and I can up and down the intensity of this layer. Yeah, and then the lighting. So that's my very favorite part. And I always make sure on every spread I draw, so out of the frame here, which you can't see, I've drawn a little arrow with the light source. So the light source is coming in this way. I always have to remind myself of that because you need to keep your shadows consistent in which direction they're going if you want it to appear vaguely realistic. And so that's what this is. And then again, for Photoshop details, this layer is set to overlay. So it's another one of those layer settings. And that just allows, it's sort of like additive light rather than subtractive light. So it's painting with light rather than painting color. Yeah, so that's where I got to.
It's wonderful. It's so luminous.
I was really pleased with how this one came out because it really did give that spring almost heat in the air with the snow getting really wet and slushy, and yeah, I liked it.
That's awesome. Thank you. And we've got some of Gavin's early illustrations as well. So before the text.
You can see from that picture that this is what I produce in the way of artwork. And you can see at the edges how I bleed the colour out beyond the trim marks, those trim marks at the corners. So the pictures go on beyond the, where the trim, where they're going to be trimmed off. This was a drawing, and I think, have you got the next one as well? Is there another one? Yeah, this one here as well. Both of these pictures began. Have you got the preliminary drawing?
I think I have.
For that? Yeah, this one here. This is it.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, this one. This was a very, very rough sort of sketch that I did for both of those pages, because originally I was going to have only one page looking at extinct animals and birds and fish and birds and animals, dinosaurs. And I was going to have just one page, and this was just like kind of off the top of my head. And you can see I hadn't thought very much about where things were going to go, because look at the gutter. It's going to go right down and get rid of the moth. See, it's very interesting, because when I was at school, we were told that New Zealand had never had any dinosaurs. We didn't have any dinosaurs, we were told. We just had birds, and we had big birds like moa and stuff like that. But those big sort of, pteropods and things like that, we were told they didn't exist. They hadn't existed here. And then in the 1980s, Joan Whiffen found a vertebrae, which was a fossil that was 70 to 65 million years old. And it just revolutionized the whole way we all saw our prehistory. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So I thought about this for a while, and then I decided that I'd like to do 2 pages. So those 2 previous pages, they evolved. This one here, the tuatara, of course, is a direct descendant of these pteropods. It has never changed. Millions and millions and millions of years this thing has lived in Aotearoa and has never changed. And it directly relates back to these big creatures that wandered around Aotearoa. Now, at the moment, I have to tell you this, at the moment, the Canterbury Museum has just mounted a new exhibition of large birds and reptiles that have been recently discovered in Central Otago, including a 3-metre long crocodile from St. Bathans and a absolutely gigantic, like it's an over a metre tall parrot. And they found a leg bone of this parrot in St. Bathans at Central Otago.
Wow.
Down near Alexandra. And it's only like last year they decided that this bone that they'd had for a couple of years really did belong to a giant parrot, one of the biggest parrots that has ever lived.
Amazing.
And it's amazing. And they've made a model of it. And if you come down to Christchurch, you must go and see the exhibition because it's just breathtaking. They've made a model of this giant parrot and it's sitting there. And it's fantastic. And so I find this whole thing of these are all recent discoveries. And so these creatures here on this page are some of the more well-known ones that we knew about that have become extinct. Partly, I've chosen these ones partly because they've become extinct through the intervention of humans. Whereas those other big creatures from 60 million years ago, they died off naturally through natural causes like, the big sort of asteroid that hit the Earth 65 million years ago, all that sort of stuff. Human beings didn't have anything to do with their demise. But these creatures on this page no longer exist because of human intervention. So if you'd like to go back to the this page here, I'll talk to you a little bit about, back to the other one.
Oh, sorry.
That's right, this one here. You might like to hear about some of the techniques they use. I'm very fond of using candle wax. And so this creature here, this little bone on the left-hand top corner is got the white highlights are done with candle wax. And same with the spots and dots on the actual tuatara itself. Those little white marks are candle wax and then a wash of ink over the top. And just above the tail of the tuatara is a rather nice texture on the hillside, and I did that with salt. So it's very much a hands-on business, my art making. If it doesn't work, then it's back to the drawing board. You have to scrap it and start again. But 9 times out of 10, I don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But I often find when I start a new book, I start completely from scratch. I'm completely useless. I can't draw. I can't come up with good painting
that's nice to hear.
quality. It's just, I'm going through the same process at the moment. I'm working on a book at the moment, and I've produced about 3 or 4 illustrations, and I think I'm going to have to scrap them because they're just awful. And I'm going to have to build up. You have to build up that skill level all over again every time I do a new book. And
I think people find that very surprising because I say that as well. I often, I'm so frustrated with what I'm producing and it's not right. And people, oh no, you must just draw what you think. Like,
you don't, do you? No.
The previous spread, Gavin, the one with the huia.
Yeah.
Did you mask out the terrain? Did you mask that the white globes before you? No. Gosh, that looks hard.
No, I just painted around the outside of it. And then while it was and then I wet the whole thing and then splattered those wee bits of ink all over the top just so it got a wee bit speckled.
Really good aging.
I wanted it to look like some old page from a museum, And of course, all the gaps are left there for text. So the text, when it's added to that, adds another dimension to that.
Yeah.
I noticed in the book, that you have replaced the eel with the gecko. At what point did that change happen?
Well, I think it's because the eel was travelling through the book, and I suddenly thought, I need something other than that eel. I was using those eels elsewhere. And so I found out, I think it was on the internet, I found a picture of this giant gecko that actually is in a museum in France. It's not even in New Zealand, but it was found in New Zealand, well, I don't know when I can't remember. Back in
1986.
When was it? 1886?
1986.
1986. Okay. And yeah, we don't even have it here. I just thought it was quite a fascinating thing to. Yeah, here it is. It's the Kawekaweo, and it was a gecko, and it's in Marseille, in France. And I thought it was just a more interesting thing to have than the eel, because the eels appear throughout the rest of the book.
So you didn't have to redo this whole illustration, did you? Did they replace that?
No, I think I cut it out and stuck it on.
Oh.
Real cut and paste.
I'm pretty certain that's what I did.
I noticed in the illustration, the Spirit of the Tuatara, in your one, you've got the vertebrae quite far to the left where the text now is, so they must have like digitally moved that around as well to make room for it all to fit in.
Yeah, it's been moved. Designer moved it.
Digital cut and paste.
Yeah.
I think we've got some of your roughs and storyboards as well, don't we, Alexia?
Yeah,
Yep.
so I think we've got this one.
Yeah.
Well, again, you can see how this totally changed.
So is this illustration, Gavin?
That's the illustration,
Yeah.
Wow.
and the rough you've just seen there. You see, I was originally going to have a great big eel in the middle of it. I was on a kind of panic mode when I was doing this book because of the time limit that I had. And I was just, freaking out about getting this thing finished. And this was a very, very early idea for that page about New Zealand native fish. Can you go back to so this one here? Yeah. Again, I've used, as you can see, candle wax on the moon, and also the stars are all candle wax, and so is the gleam on the surface of the water, and also all the spots on the Galaxii fish are done with just coloured pencil over the top of a watercolour wash with a few candle wax additions. I started this book knowing practically nothing about New Zealand native creatures. I just had very, very, very sketchy knowledge of these things, like fish, for example. I thought there was only like one kind of whitebait. But then I found that the whitebait are actually the hatchlings of these native trout.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And the native trout, of course, spend quite a lot of time at sea. Even though they're freshwater fish, they spend quite a lot of time at sea, and that's where they breed and lay their eggs. Their eggs are hatched, and their eggs come back into the estuaries and go up the rivers as hatchlings to become adult fish. And they are the whitebait that are caught every year. And I also didn't know that these kōkapū are actually very, very shy. They only feed at night. And all the big introduced fish like rainbow trout and all those sort of things, they bully them. They push them around and they eat their feed, and they provide a very uncomfortable environment for them to live in. So, get out there and catch some rainbow trout. Eat them. Get rid of them. So, yeah, it was fascinating. I really learned a huge amount.
So I think we've got a couple of your cover illustrations coming up.
Yep. Okay. Now, I had this idea. This is the original painting that I did for the cover of Aotearoa. And again, it's thanks to the designer that we now have a cloud going across the whole cover, back and front. Originally, I just had one cloud. And the designer said, how about putting the cloud right across the whole cover? After all, it is called, Land of the Long White Cloud. I said, oh, that's a good idea. And he said, I'd like to get rid of that rainbow as well. And I said, oh, I quite like that rainbow. And he said, well, I think we'd be better without it. So I said, okay, get rid of it as well.
They're the experts.
Which they did. And it cleaned up the whole cover and gave it so much more presence. So that's why I've included it today.
I like the consistency as well between this book and, it's very obvious that it's by the same person, which
same
is really,
family.
Yeah. So that's the next one we've got.
Yeah. Again, we decided very early on that the white cloud should go right across the cover of this one in the same place. And therefore all the creatures and so on, would sit in the space above and below the cloud. I actually personally think this cover works best when it's seen like this, because you can see the god of the sea and the fish coming out of his mouth, and they come onto the front cover. He appears only on the back cover. And yeah, there we are.
Cool.
All the stuff thrown onto it, all the text.
Beautiful.
So was there any big changes this time from your original cover to this one?
Oh yeah, I did lots of covers.
Yeah.
I did lots of covers. And you see, this is, Kimberly will find this too, that when you're working with people who aren't used to making artwork or even looking at artwork from a designer or artistic point of view, they can't always see what you've got in mind. And so I did lots and lots of covers for this book, roughs, very, very rough, roughly painted in, and I would photograph them and send them up to the publishers in Auckland. And they would show them to the marketing people, and all the marketing people said, no, that doesn't work, or that doesn't look, that doesn't look quite right, or this would, and they did that with every design I came up with. I did about 8 designs. Finally, in the end, I thought, to hell with this is ridiculous, because they can't interpret what I was showing them. So I did a final painting like this, completely finished, and I took a photograph of it and sent it to them. They said, yeah, that's great. Well.
Oh yeah.
Because they couldn't they couldn't see what I had in mind from the roughs that I showed them.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of skill to read a rough.
Definitely.
Sounds like you have to have a lot of conversations with the book designers and the marketing team. It's not like you have sole control over the project. Yeah, that's fine. We'll print it. So what is it like for both of you having these conversations with the designers, or just getting quite frustrated when they don't really see your vision? Any tips for navigating those conversations?
What do you do?
Well, yeah, it's very, I'm sure Gavin has been through this many times as well, it sounds like. But yeah, there's a huge amount of back and forth, and it's a big team that, there's several key players that are working all on this one book. It's not just you. But so far, I've had a pretty smooth run of usually getting my way, which has been quite nice. When I have a clear vision, I can usually get it across. But there have been a couple times where I've had to really fight for it, and I'm glad that I have. Yeah, but you have to be you have to be quick at turning around a visual concept, as Gavin was saying, that people will be able to consume quickly and understand.
Yeah. Many years ago, things in publishing have changed enormously in the 40 years that I've been involved in it. Initially, when I first started, I did everything. I came up with a story. I designed the whole book. I came up with my own characters. I made all the decisions about that book. So
Wow.
if there's anything you don't like about those early books of mine, you can only blame me, because I did everything.
Wow. So you chose like typeface and everything.
Yeah, we just used Bimbo. Yeah, more or less. There was the only design element that was involved in those early books of mine. It was done by somebody at the publishing house who prepared my artwork and the page layouts for the printers. And then they would often send the original art to the printers in China.
Wow. So they matched
And
it.
they would do all the scanning and all the processing there. It wasn't done here. There were very, very, very few people in New Zealand who were qualified and really good designers. I could almost be bold and say we didn't have any really good book designers. There were a couple of people who did superb things, but in the world of New Zealand children's literature in the 80s, 90s, we didn't have any of the people that we've got today. And so I've really enjoyed working with the book designers that I've been working with in recent years, because they have come up with suggestions and ideas that I would never have thought of myself, because you become stale after a while, and you just repeat yourself. You just go think, oh yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, they push you to improve things. Like you wouldn't have even noticed the changes that they've done, and they're remarkable.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And sometimes when they come up with something that I don't don't agree with, then I'll say, I don't think we should do that. And usually that's okay too. But having somebody who is really involved with your work, and then they come along and think up a new idea that is going to lift it to a new level, that's very, very exciting.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're an amazing support crew to have. I think it's been really valuable for young people who are interested in illustration as a career to know that if they do get into illustrating children's books or publishing, that they're not on their own. There are a team of professionals behind them who will keep them motivated, suggest new ideas, or challenge their work and push it further and further. So it's really cool hearing about book design, because I had no idea they even existed, and it's clear that they do some really cool work. Where are we next, Alexia?
Next we had the whale illustration, and then we've also got your storyboard from the house that Jack built.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is just another page showing, I don't know, I'm not quite sure. I think I just threw this in as an extra.
The house that Jack built, the storyboard for that one.
Yeah, let's look at that one. Yeah.
Wow.
Here it is. This is I was living in Boston at the time, and you can see at the top, it was 1996, and I was I'd had a few books published in the States, and I had been to New York lots and lots and lots of times looking for publishers who might be interested in my work. And then I went to another publisher one day in Boston, and this woman there, a publisher, an editor, she said to me, do you know what you should do? You should find a book that tells us about New Zealand. And I said, and she said, we won't publish it, but you should take it back to New Zealand and get it published there, because she said, I think that's what you should be doing. You should be writing about stuff you know about yourself. Because I was desperately trying to break into the American market, which is, it's a very different one to ours. And at the time, I had an agent in New York, and she just said to me one day, she said, you know, picture books are for children who can't read yet. I said, what? I said, I can't agree with that.
No.
I said, I think picture books can be really quite sophisticated, and adults can enjoy them and read them.
Yeah.
I said, not just, she said, well, that's what I believe. And she said, you will find most American publishers will believe that as well.
Wow.
And so I got fed up with trying to come up with stories about little cute rabbits having a happy little day
adventure.
because they'd found a little egg under a daffodil or something. And
I think I read that one.
well, it could be a good one, it could be a big seller. But you know what I mean? I couldn't relate to it. And so I sat down in my flat we were living in at the time, and I did this in probably about an hour.
Wow.
Because when I looked at it, I realized that I'd been thinking about this book for years and years. And I'd wanted to do a New Zealand version of the house that Jack built for years and years and years. But I'd never sort of got around to doing it. And so one day I sat down and I just ruled up a storyboard, sketched it all out, wrote all the notes down the side like that, and there it was. And when I came to do the final book, when I finally got home, it changed very, very little. It was basically all there in my head. And so, yeah.
I had a very quick question about this book. Where is it actually? Is it set in a real life town in New Zealand? Because
it's probably Northland. It's probably Northland. I would imagine. And there was actually no town burnt down, as there is in the end of my book.
Yeah.
At the end of my book, a town is demolished during the land wars, but actually that never really happened. This book has been criticised because it doesn't include the Treaty of Waitangi. But when you've only got 32 pages and you've got a lot of material you want to cover, it's quite hard to include all those sort of things without making it cluttered and, clunky.
Yeah.
So that's why Aotearoa is like 64 pages long.
Yes, right. That's right.
So both of you, Kimberly and Gavin, you've both illustrated books which have then been translated into te reo. Did you have any input into, was there any changes which you had to make to any of your illustrations or anything like that?
The only thing with te reo is it tends to be wordier. It takes up more space, more room. So I think they can get around that by just reducing the typeface, the size of the type, and making it a bit smaller. But I didn't have to redo anything.
With my experience, the tuna in Hiriwa was actually written in te reo to begin with, so it wasn't translated. It was translated into English.
Oh wow!
So the illustrations were fully done in the te reo.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was really cool.
And there's a finished spread from the house that Jack built.
Yeah.
Which is one of my most favourite books, because I love the narrative which happens around the framing, the frame around the spread.
Yeah.
Very clever.
And one of our, so we had asked some members of our community to suggest questions and ask local teens. And one of my teens asked about what it's like with different publishing markets, because you said, Gavin, you've spent so long trying to break into the American market, and Kimberly, you've come from North America. What is it? Do you see any differences between publishing in New Zealand versus trying to publish into North America?
Gavin?
Well, the books that I have had published in the States have been either retellings of folk tales and fairy stories, like The Three Little Pigs, or Maori myths, like Maui and the Sun, Maui and the Goddess of Fire, things like that. I have had, I did have a couple of my own stories published in the States. Little Rabbit and the Sea, which of course could be happening anywhere. It's not necessarily a New Zealand story. It's kind of a universal one. But I actually have had more books published in China in recent years. Things like Bruiser and the Big Snow have been published in Taiwan and Korea and mainland China. Even the autobiography of my teddy bear called Teddy One Eye, that was published in China last year as well. So I didn't have to make any compromises to that climate, to that society. They simply took my work as it was, which I thought was quite exciting. It was very exciting.
Yeah, and I haven't had much published in North America, and I left when I was far too little to really know much more about it. But same with Gavin. I've had the great thrill of having my work published and them taking it as it is into Korea and Taiwan. But I did actually have an offer on one of my books that they wanted to significantly change for the US market, and that didn't go. We didn't go down that route because I just didn't want to change it. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The American market is a completely different world.
Yeah.
It's all about money, making money. Yeah.
And not taking risks.
Not the case over here in New Zealand, would you say?
Well, do you know, when I first started, the money thing was never a big issue. People who were involved in publishing were there because they loved literature. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for books that they would be proud of publishing and books they thought were worth making. And the fact, if they sold, then that was a plus. But it was never an issue. People didn't say, oh, no, we can't take this, even though we like it, because we don't think it's going to sell very well. They took books because they thought they were good bits of literature or good examples of publishing, writing. It was actually very exciting.
Did you find a similar thing, Kimberly?
I feel like that's been my experience from the day one of being published in New Zealand. I feel like I have been involved in projects that were all about the passion of the project. So I feel really lucky in that regard. I haven't felt like it had any commercial pressure, so to speak. Obviously, it's good when they do well in print, but I guess I possibly haven't written anything too risky or different. But I found it really, I'm constantly amazed that a whole team wants to work on my story. Like, it just feels like the best feeling in the world, and everyone's behind you, and it's great.
It's wonderful. I think to conclude, since we've got a little message from Helen saying we've reached our time limit, that's been really great chatting. I think we can conclude with maybe just one final question, which is, any advice to share with young illustrators who've been watching this, who want to break in? What would you tell them?
I go first?
You go first.
I would say I've watched a lot of sort of creative pep talk shows and stuff when I was getting into it. And one of the things, mostly about writing actually, but one of the things they kept saying was, if you want to write well, you should read lots. So I would say, if you want to illustrate well, you should draw lots. And it's not even good drawings, it's just sketches and sketchbooks filling them up. because you develop this sort of muscle memory. And so now I can draw a puffin without even thinking about it, but I had to draw a heap of puffins, and I drew quite anatomically correct puffins in the beginning. Now they're characters, but I'd say that was my first main bit. And then another one that I've struggled with, but I think I've finally got there, is done is better than perfect. So getting your work out and getting it seen, getting a portfolio together, and not having to make it perfect, because people want to see your work. And if it's not out there, they're not going to see it. And I guess upskilling would be my last point. You can do a lot online, as our lockdown experience and COVID taught us. There's a lot of online resources that you can use. I did some digital painting online courses, and they were amazing in the beginning. But yeah, draw.
And you, Gavin?
My first bit of advice would be not to be too pleased with yourself. Always keep in the back of your mind a little bit of self-doubt, because that will make you continue. Think of the work that you're working on at the moment as preparation for your next piece of work, which is going to be so much better. And that's what I think keeps you going. If you stop and think, I am a fantastic illustrator, my work is absolutely stunning, I can't think of how I could improve it, then you may as well go and die. You may as well retire. Because I think you should be always questioning what you're doing and trying to do it better. That's my advice. I mean, I have a lot of people coming to me who have written and illustrated one little book, and they want it published.
Yeah.
So just a minute, just wait. Give yourself some time. Why don't you, especially children, a lot of children come to me and say, I've produced this book, and I'd like to have it published. And I said, well, okay, how old are you? You might be 13 or something like that. Think of the next few years as your apprenticeship. Just keep working and you'll get better. And as you read more, as you mature, your ideas will change and you'll be pleased that you did.
Awesome.
I think.
That's been really good. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us.
That was really fun.
We went way over time, but that was because it was so interesting.
Just keep chatting.
There's so much that I think we've learned about illustration, about the publishing world. And I think you've both really shown how much work goes into these books, from the research for the nonfiction elements, like looking at trying to get a realistic looking animal, trying to design new characters and conveying the story, looking at the text and how it'll be shaped in your books. I think hopefully people who watch this can take away how much effort and how much skill that you guys have. So thanks so much for making time to chat with us today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All the best. Thank you.